of written materials. And you always try to embed the material in the context of the communication. That is something which is very important for the approach by mirroring in contrast to others. You ask how is which part of the communication process do the conclusions based on. So it means that it is very important to see whether I'm talking in front of a group, whether it is a one-to-one communication, or whether it is a class communication where you have single group work. So the question is really, in which communication and which part of the communication has this transcript being produced? And I mean, we can imagine that we would talk in a very formal way, very differently than we are talking in a one-to-one informal environment. And of course, what you say and what you would not say strongly depends on the environment. Whether you trust the researcher, and you would say things differently than if you do not trust him or her because it's a very formal environment. And the material has to be interpreted within this context. And the reason why this communication situation is so important, when we started to do, or when I as a young researcher started to carry out interviews, there was a very famous researcher in Germany. He told me, look, you can carry out an interview and you can have your questions. You will ask this question to the person, but be aware at one point of the interviewee will tell you what he or she wants to tell you. There is always one special point, one thing which is in the head of the interview, and they will tell you whatever you ask. So, I mean, if, for example, an accident had happened in the morning in front of my house, and we would then do an interview. I mean, it would take you maybe 10 minutes, and then he would tell me, and look, I'm not so concentrated because this morning I still have this picture in my mind or something like that. So something which is important for the interviewing will always come up, and you cannot hinder that. So you better realize that, and you should not try to follow too strictly your own ideas. You should be sensitive to what's in the head of the person you are interviewing. I mean, we can even put a lot of theoretical discussions around this description, because there is always some kind of reality beyond that what we are seeing, and this reality is always breaking through. So, and that is the reason why the communication system is in the duration is so important. And you have to interpret the material with regards to its origin and effect. So, I mean, that is, I don't need to elaborate that further. So, qualitative content analysis is a systematic approach guided by rules. I already pointed that out. So, the principal point of the qualitative content analysis is really that you apply rules. It means it is really strongly connected to quality standards. And that is something which I really ask researchers quite often. How did you evaluate the data? How did you come from your coding book to the results after it? So, I mean, these rules are really, especially for young researchers, helping a lot in order to find out what you want to do. So, yes, orientation on rules of analyzing the texts which are formulated up front. It means it's not the case that you first have your text and your material and afterwards you formulate rules. You have the rules formulated before you really have the materials. So, okay, so the systematic approach guided by rules means that you have a specific procedure, which is, of course, dependent on the research question, the kind of material. I mean, it's self-evident, but it's sometimes really necessary to repeat that. That, of course, the way how you evaluate the data depends on your research question and the material you have. And of course, I mean, the research questions has to be at the beginning. you may modify that, but if you don't have a clear research question, I mean, I don't need to repeat what I said yesterday, but if you don't have a clear research question, you will end up with kind of material which will not answer your question, and then you are really lost. So research question at the beginning determines kind of material. The approach chosen depends on these two aspects. And it's not the other way around, because I want to use qualitative content analysis, therefore I use interview methods. I mean, that is silly. You have to decide the methods in relation to your research question. So, you have to formulate rules for every step of analyzing the material in advance. And I mean, as already said, at the beginning, it's already quite helpful. When you are more experienced, then you might be a little bit more relaxed. So it's what we would call a kind of an anatomizing procedure. It means you are really cutting everything into small pieces. How do we analyze the material? If you are familiar with Crowned theory, you know that Crowned theory implies that you are cutting the material into pieces and that you interpret the pieces using categories. So that is actually similar over here. You have a text, you cut it into pieces. It's not important the sequence of which is within the material. So you cut it and you interpret each piece of paper, of text according to special categories. So the development of the categories is really the center of the analysis, and that actually holds for Crowned theory too. Crowned theory is a kind of a text analysis too, apart from the fact that it's a huge research method and huge research paradigm. But this part of evaluation of the data, they have, and the usage of categories they have in common. So, and that is actually, the system of categories is the central instrument, and of course you can revise your categories. If you realize that the categories don't work, you shouldn't continue forever, you simply revise them, even if that means that you have to put a lot of the material already evaluated into the waste bin. It's better if you realize it doesn't work, you should not continue. I mean, that costs you a couple of years, and you are definitely a little bit sad for a couple of days, but I mean, doesn't make any sense to continue with categories which do not work. So, the development and the reasoning of the categories is the most important aspect. And we have a very famous quote by the German researcher Krippendorf. He said, how categories are defined is an art, little is written about it. So if you look, for example, at research papers, you will find something like, I have the following research question, the following design, I have used some kind of coding approach, and in the appendix, you will find an excerpt of a coding manual. That's it. How did you come to these categories? I mean, that is something which is really, I mean, it's usually not described, and and developing the categories is something where I only can tell you, you should do it in a group. It means you develop first categories. Usually they come out of the text as in vivo codes, or you have it theoretically developed in advance, but then you definitely need the help of other PhD students in your group, or and with whom you can discuss that. But it's very important that you really discuss the categories in a group, especially because then you can find out whether they are adequate or not. So, the correlation of analysis and content is very important. That means a correlation is here not meant, maybe we should use the word relation. So it is not a mathematical word of correlation. So you have the relation of the analysis and the content. The method should be oriented towards the investigation. And you should not use any methods blindly. As already said, you can really modify your question and your instruments, but it always needs to be done in a controlled way. It means and that is something which happens quite often, especially when you are in a hurry. I mean, most of the times we are all in a hurry. It means you change something. We say, okay, it was so obvious why I have changed. For example, the kind of categories or the kind of evaluation methods. I don't need to write that down. After half a year, you have no idea why you have done that. I promise you that. It's so obvious for you in that moment, and after some time, it's gone. So you need to really force yourself that you write down each change you are making. It is so important because you can make a lot of changes within academic procedure, but you need to document that. So that is something which is very important. And of course, the adequacy of the method has to be proven in the context of the material. So you really need to give yourself a hard time while thinking about the evaluation method, whether this way how you are evaluating the material is adequate. So it is a theory-guided analysis, and that distinguishes content analysis or text analysis strongly from grounded theory. As you know, grounded theory is a research paradigm where, at least principally at the beginning, you entered the field without knowing anything. That means you had, according to the theory of Clasersfeld and Strauss, you had to put all you knew in front of the door, and then you entered the research room. Nowadays, with the modification of the grounded theory by Strauss and Corbin, it said, okay, of course we know something. I mean, we are not empty. So we enter the field with theories. But it is still the case that with grounded theory, you try to be very open. That is very different to this qualitative content analysis. How you develop already your text is already theory-driven, and the analysis is theory-driven behind. Maybe, I mean, because I'm trained in this kind of analysis of a work, it was the reason why I always asked, what kind of theory do you have? What's the theoretical framework? So it is definitely necessary to have a strong, elaborated theoretical framework behind. It means you have to justify all your steps going back to theory. And the arguments concerning the content are more important than the arguments concerning the method. So it's really necessary to always think, is my evaluation method, are my categories adequate for the content? As already said, qualitative content analysis can use quantitative methods too. So you can integrate qualitative and quantitative methods, and you need to give reasons for quantitative procedures, because by origin, content analysis is a qualitative method, but it allows you to open it to quantitative procedures, but you need to justify that. Yes, and I mean, one reason would be, for example, you are evaluating extreme cases. I mean, that is something which you usually do. You always look for extreme cases. If you have covered the extreme case, then you can know, okay, everything, and if you can justify that these are the extreme cases. For example, a teacher who is very strongly oriented towards teaching mathematics, and the subject is always important, and another teacher who is always oriented towards pedagogy. If you have these two cases, obvious that probably all the other cases, all the other teachers you may have interviewed, for example, are something in between. So, I mean, if you have, so the power of extreme cases is something which, from my point of view, is not described carefully enough in research literature, because if you have the, or if you are sure that you have the extreme cases, then you are mainly home and try and safe. So, and then if you realize that within your two extreme cases, you have quite often, so for example, a teacher who looks for pedagogical arguments, but on the other hand, is for each pedagogical argument trying to bring it, to relate this to mathematics-related justifications. So it means whenever this teacher is, for example, diagnosing students' errors, then she brings in pedagogical and mathematical arguments or explanations for the errors in. And you would say, okay, that is a very interesting case. And if that, for example, if your example is, let's say, 20 teachers, you have interviewed 20 teachers, and if you have this case, let's say, 10 times, it would be very interesting, very strict indicator. So, I mean, if something appears very often, then you would say, look, these kind of cases are very interesting, and I would like then to do some kind of quantitative evaluation. That means how often does this group of teachers, for example, a certain kind of a feedback to the students in a certain way. And actually, I mean, if you do this kind of coding, there are a lot of computer programs around. In Germany, we have especially MaxQDR. There is Nudist around. I'm not sure whether it's still working. It was very popular. So there are a lot of in vivo and whatsoever. So there are a lot of methods around which you could use. I mean, we are nowadays using mainly MaxQDR because it allows you, you can immediately start, which is sometimes not the case when you have quite complicated evaluation methods. So before you start with a computer program, clarify how complicated it is. And for example, there are really very nice evaluation packages around, but then they are very time consuming or to learn them. And it's sometimes very complicated to save the data. So I mean, that is something which is very important to use to clarify that. So, I mean, the quality factors are, as usual, objectivity, reliability, and validity. I think I don't need to explain that. I mean, that is obvious and well known to everybody. I guess you have heard about that, but I mean, that holds for each kind of coding procedure. When you are evaluating a text with via coding, that means giving a code or category to a special part of a text, then you, of course, do it on your own. But of course, it's only what we would say really trustworthy if somebody else has done it and would come to a similar or same result. It means if you give your coding manual to one of your colleagues and say, okay, come on, code this material another time. And if that would be result to the same come to the same results, then you would say that it has a high iterator reliability. And I mean, the reason is, of course, that I mean, if I have made errors, I would like to find out whether, I mean, I have made these errors. And of course, I mean, it's simply not trustworthy if the results of my empirical study afterwards are simply influenced by my own way of coding. So, and I mean, that is something, this iterator reliability creates a lot of costs. When I started as a PhD student, I didn't have any students helping me. I was there with my PhD supervisor, that's it. At this time in Germany, it's now more than 30 years ago, there were small groups, one professor, one PhD student, no students around helping us. Nowadays, at least in Germany, and I mean, I know it from the US, you have big research groups, and of course, all my PhD students have access to students helping them. It means they are coding all the material once, and then one or two students are coding the material another time. Then we see whether the coding manual is really reliable. And that is something which is difficult to achieve. At least our president from our university still has the old model of research in time in his head and said, look, it's not necessary that PhD students have students help, but no, we say they need it for the sake of quality management. So now let's go through the different steps, and then we will come to their own work. First of all, we define the material. That means we analyze very carefully which kind of data we are going to evaluate. Let's say about an interview with several teachers. Then we look at the formal characteristic of the material. Okay, interview with teachers done in an informal environment or formal environment. And then you clarify what you want to find out. For example, one direction of the analysis could be, as already said, the way how the teacher provides feedback. So what you could do is you could observe the teacher in classroom, and then you would afterwards ask him or her, what do you think how you provide feedback? And you could embed that in other questions as well. So you would need to find out in which direction I'm going to evaluate the material. And of course, I can develop theoretical differentiations of the research question. For example, if I think about a bigger research question, for example, if I have teachers evaluated with, as I described to you yesterday, with the TEDS-M study, so I have their mathematical knowledge, the math pedagogical knowledge, and the general pedagogical knowledge. Then it could be a very interesting question, for example, how do they provide feedback? Because, I mean, they have then done, for example, answered the video-based test, and so we know a little bit about their way, how they are providing feedback. So interview could really be what kind of thinking do they have about their own feedback methods. So then I have that really differentiated very clearly and embedded to my whole theoretical approach of Sherman, Richardson, and so on, to the whole TEDS-M model. First, you remember that the cognitive aspect, the affective aspect, and then the situated aspect with the PID model. So this would be something I have in my head, and then I question, okay, feedback method, where does it belong? And I mean, that's something we of course say, okay, that belongs to the PID model. It means how I really classify or see my own behavior in classroom. So, based on all this work done, I decide for an analysis method and a distinct procedure. And if we look at that, we see the strong difference to grounded theory. Because grounded theory would always mean that you analyze the material, and the main recommendation is let the data speak to you. And here, we don't ask the data for their answer, you have your question and you try to force the material to speak to you, but in a certain way. So it's strongly theory guided. That doesn't mean that grounded theory is poorer, it's simply another approach, and you need to decide which way you need to go. So if you are have come so far, then you need to define your units of analysis. So what is actually really the unit you are going to define? For example, it could be in this interview, whenever the teacher then making a break and say, look, okay, now let's discuss that from another point of view. And you would say, okay, now the teacher emphasized something differently. If it could be a classroom discussion, the interaction between the teacher and the student, then it could be that there is this end of one discussion. So that would be another kind of a unit of the analysis. You would then afterwards analyze. And that is very typical for the approach by this very strongly controlled approach by Murray. you have three different ways or three different steps, I should say, sorry, of analyzing the material. You can summarize it, you can explicate it. I mean, it's obvious here the material is getting smaller. Here you are extending the material, and here you are going to structure it. So these are three different ways of analyzing the material and of development the categories. And then you, of course, check the category system by means of the theory and the material. And afterwards, you ask, of course, whether your results answer the question you have posed at the very beginning over here. And of course, then you can use the special factors you have developed for further content analysis. So, I mean, I have said already many things while explaining this data. So you define the material, which data will be analyzed. Yes, who produced the data would be one question, under which conditions, what was the emotional, cognitive, and general action background of the writer. I mean, that is really very important. We had that result when we did interviews, controlled interviews with students who were doing modeling problems. And the problems were taken out of the real world of the students, and one problem was simply too close to one student because a friend had just died due to cancer, and it had to do with cancer. So I mean, suddenly you couldn't discuss about this problem anymore. So you need to know what is really going emotionally. What is the social background of the person who has produced the data? What is the target group and the situation of the merchant? So, formal characteristics of the material, which kind is the data available, interviews, transcripts, questionnaires, and so on. That is very important. Then the direction of the examples. You should try to find out who produced this material, which, I mean, it's usually yourself. Then you try to describe the text. That means you are trying to get the text in a form that you first understand it in a certain way. And you try to analyze the effect of the text on the target group. You try to analyze the emotional status of the person, that the whole material in a model of communication. And that is something that I just said. I mean, somebody will always come to the point they want to make. I mean, I would not overemphasize this aspect of the communication situation, because sometimes you hardly know anything about the communication system. As already said, qualitative content analysis is guided by theory. Then you decide about the analysis method and the distinct procedure. It means you divide the analysis into single steps of interpretation, which are determined upfront, and you have, as already said, a revisable method. Now it's becoming a bit more technical. You need to know what is your unit of coding. And I mean, a coding unit could be, on one hand, a whole paragraph. It could be several sentences. It could be one word, quite often, or it could be a combination of several words. For example, ha, I got it. I mean, that would be important code you would use. And I mean, this ha, I got it, would say, okay, got the solution idea. So I mean, the category would be solution idea, and you would code, ha, I got it, with this solution idea. So, and of course, I mean, people would say it maybe differently, but I mean, the code would be, I got it, or solution. And it means, what are you going to code must follow some kind of way. So whether you really want to have only words, or several words, or a whole paragraph. So, and then the unit of context, it's the maximal part of the text which can be assigned to a category. So you really need to describe what is the upper boundary until which you want to assign or evaluate one text with one code. So, what kind of basic methods of interpretation do we have? I mean, most methods of systematic interpretation have some kind of common core. And we, as already said, have the three basic methods of evaluation. You can either summarize, applicate, and structure. So summarize means you reduce your material in a way that the main content persists. That's something which quite often happens. You have carried out a kind of a study and your supervisor asks you, okay, what did you do? And in order to answer this question in a good way, you would summarize your material, that you say, okay, you delete all the R's and O's in an ordinary discussion, and you would really condense the whole description on what is really important. For example, you would omit all the detours a student has done in order to come to a solution. The next way is actually really the other way around, and you would do it quite often that you first summarize your idea and then you explicate it afterwards. It means you try to use material from other parts of the context in order to really, it is a first kind of an interpretation. It means you really want to interpret the material and you are actually extending it. So it means you have something like, I got it, and then you would start an interpretation to what does that refer, what does that mean. I mean, it's quite an obvious, but I mean, if you have more elaborated sentences, then you can talk a lot about what it means that somebody is using or is saying something in a certain context. And the last one is the structuring. It means you are really coding the data according to certain criteria with the aim of filtering certain structures out of the material. And I would actually say, I mean, you use all three kinds of methods usually when you use qualitative content analysis. But that is a very rough state at the beginning if you try to summarize in order to, and I mean, the summarizing stage is very important that you know by yourself what you have found out. You really omit all the unnecessary detail, that you have a rough, strong idea what you have found out. And then, of course, afterwards you go into detail. And the structuring approach, where you really code the material, that is then the approach which is mainly used. So, these basic methods of interpretation, I mean, there are different ways how to interpret a text. I mean, there are around discursive analysis or communication analysis. Here we refer to this kind of interpretation of a text within the text analysis. And it means we want to reduce, or we want to interpret the text using three different basic methods. The first of all, what somebody is called the analysis of intensity or analysis of frequency. And here, intensity or valence, I mean, that is something which is so complicated formulated because if you have beliefs, for example, when you remember yesterday the dynamic or the static view on mathematics, you can't say that somebody who has a preference for dynamic view or somebody who has a preference for a static view on mathematics is wrong. So you would always code that as having a valence for something, a preference for something. So you would call that an analysis of intensity, because you cannot say that it's right or wrong. I will have brought an example with you where you can luckily say it's right or wrong, but whenever it comes to beliefs, to convictions, you cannot say something is right or wrong. So that is meant with the analysis of intensity. And then you have the classification. That means you really classify your text according to the different codes. And then you have single case studies and you try to explicate something. And of course, you can always have some kind of mixed methods where you especially combine different methods. So, what we are doing afterwards in a minute is we are doing some kind of structuring approach. That means we want to find, we have material, I will explain to you how it was gathered, and we want to get structure into this material by using a system of categories. It means the dimension of structuring has to be described very clearly. You need to deduce it from the research question, you need to reason it, the theory, and then it's usual that you do not only have your categories, you usually have some kind of subcategories or subdimensions, whatever you wish to call that. For example, if you think about the big large-scale study I described yesterday, so you could have, for example, biological content knowledge, and one aspect would be knowledge about feedback. So that could be some kind of subdimension. So we have four kinds of structuring. We have kind of a formal structuring, content structuring, and typing structuring, and scaling structuring. By formal structuring, we mean that you simply try to find out the formal structure. So what is really the underlying structure within the text? So for example, you structure according to topic-related units or structure of an argumentation. For example, we had this morning the question of argumentation and proof. So if you, for example, would structure the text according to various kinds of proofs, which would be could be mentioned. Content structuring means you look for special topics within the material. It means, for example, feedback. You look whether feedback aspects are analyzed or are mentioned within the topic. Or you could, for example, look for everything concerning fractions, so feedback given to fractions. When it comes to typing structuring, you look for the extreme cases. I already mentioned this very important aspect of extreme cases. And of course, you look for something which is coming up quite usually. So if you have the extreme cases, then you can look what is in the middle. And the scaling structuring, that is something which is where you now bring in the quantitative aspects. It means you can try to rate the material on a scale. Usually you have only an ordinal scale. You wouldn't have an interval scale. It is quite rare that you have interval scale level in qualitative study. Already happy when you have ordinal scale level. And then you can code the variables with given different values. And that's what we are doing now. We are now doing this kind of scaling structuring where we are coding a material according to a code manual which was already developed. So what I have brought with me, oh yes, okay, the coding manual. I have brought one coding manual with me, and I simply ask not to give it away because it's not published in this way, although the data are already, or the results are already published. So you have the coding manual, which is actually a few pages, where you describe very clearly what kind of variables are happening, are occurring, not happening, sorry, are occurring, and how you are going to evaluate. And it's quite usual to either use, you always balance them around 0. So you can either have it very carefully, if you start with 2, 1, 0, -1, -2, or if you want to be more rough, you start with 1, 0, -1, or of course you can have 1 and -1, or 1 and -1 or whatever. So of course the differentiation tells you how precise you wish to be. And the recommendation is always do not try to be too precise at the beginning. So we have this list of possible values of the variable. We have a description, and you see it over here. You have the description what +2 means. We have coding rules. That is what follows in the text afterwards. You have coding rules for each value. That means when should you give a certain value to a special text passage. You have anchor items. And the usage of the word anchor items is very difficult because you have anchor items in quantitative studies as well. And an anchor item in a quantitative study means that you are connecting different test forms with the help of anchor items. So you have test form A, test form B, and you have, let's say, a core of a third of the items which are in both test forms. Then it allows you to make descriptions of both or over both test forms. That means anchoring in quantitative method. Here, anchor items are used in all qualitative studies very differently. Of course, it has to do with the anchor as well. You anchor your material or your coding manual in the empirical material. It means then you know when somebody says something like that, then I should give a -2. So that is, and these anchor items are usually taken out of the text. So it is the anchoring of your coding manual within the original material. So, first of all, read the coding manual carefully, and then I have brought one example with me, and maybe we simply distribute it and then I explain it. We do not need so many. Okay, one more. So, let's go through the text, and I explain a little bit to you. Oh my goodness. So, you see at the beginning you have the variables, and you always need something where you say what, yes, 97, a serious response, but resulting from a misinterpretation of the task. I mean, if somebody has misinterpreted the task, then you should try to indicate it. And then 98, that is something where, I mean, you need something like that. When somebody reads, okay, write something like the weather is fine. Or I've just had a wonderful morning. I mean, you will have them somewhere. We will receive that from students or from even teachers. So, and then if something is crossed out. So then you find the coding rules. So and then you see very carefully, when you are giving 2, when you are giving 1, when 0, -1, and -2. And then you afterwards have your anchor items on the second page. So these are the anchor items, so they actually always go with this coding manual. And I mean, and you see from the scribbling that this is definitely really true answers of students. And so, and then you find, so, and then you find that it's actually this page, proving in geometry form. And it is actually the following task, which was given to future teachers in Germany and in Hong Kong. And I have brought this material with me from Hong Kong. That's the reason why it is in English. So, and the question is, we wanted to find out the underlying question about pedagogical content knowledge and mathematical knowledge of future teachers, and we want to compare the level of competency of Hong Kong's future teachers. Australian too. So it was a three-country comparative study between Hong Kong, Germany, and Australia. So they all received the same item. And the students were something at the beginning or middle of their study. So, and they had a lot of other questions, but the following question was given to them. If you double the length of the side of a square, the length of each diagonal will be doubled as well. So that is the sentence. The following pre-formal proof is given. We use square tiles of the same size. If we use 4 tiles to make one square, we will get a square with a side length twice the length of the squared tiles. We can see immediately that each diagonal has twice the length of the ones of the squared tiles because the two diagonals of 2 tiles are put directly together. And we had, and what is the first question is, please formulate a formal proof, similar as we write down the proof of a theorem of geometry for the sentence above. Afterwards, we have asked the students whether they think that is a proper argumentation, this visual one, and you can imagine that you cannot evaluate the answer of the student, whether this is a proper or an improper answer or argumentation as right or wrong. It's simply a tendency. It means that's the reason why we use this kind of intensity or valence. It's a preference, how I would like to have. And I can tell you that many future teachers in Germany, as well in Australia, as well in Hong Kong, but especially in Hong Kong, did not consider that as a kind of a proof, and they even had difficulties to see that as an argumentation, as a valid argumentation, because it's only a graph. We don't want to go into detail concerning the validity of this argumentation. And what you have now over here are 5 student answers. Number 12, number 8, number 5, and number 37, and number 16. And you should simply code these 5 student answers and give reasons for it. It means you should either say it is a +2, a +1, 0, -1, -2, or you could say, look, nothing is applicable. That's possible too. And you should do that, I would think, in pairs or in groups of 3. I would think 15 minutes time, because you need to through, and maybe you, first of all, before you start, you may give yourself 2 minutes to think about a possible proof you would give, or you would develop. It was too easy. Yes, the problem was that I had selected them, but originally they asked me about 15 to 20, and I think it didn't fit in my time frame. At least was the reason why I selected only one certificate, and then I didn't change so on. Sure. But I mean, the interesting thing is now the arguments. I mean, that is not okay, we agree, but I mean, they have to give arguments on the basis of the coding. Okay. All the groups finished? Great, okay. It was, I should say, it was too easy, and the reason is the following. I have something about 15 students with solutions with me, and because we didn't have enough time for, because then it would, we would take 3 hours to evaluate, because it's getting really much more complicated, because these 5 solutions were quite easy. I mean, they were, it didn't need so much argumentation. I mean, that was the problem, that they are in a certain order. Okay, that was a difficulty, and okay. So, but I mean, the most important thing is now really how do we come to the results. So, okay, let's start. I mean, everything is clear concerning the question. I mean, you would think that, especially, I mean, they were not so, but we were a little bit surprised that many Hong Kong teachers, future teachers, had difficulties with this question too. And we were not surprised that many Australian future teachers had severe difficulties. Because everything when it comes to proofs, we have seen that yesterday with the results of text, and whenever something comes to prove, it's getting more and more complicated. So, okay, so let's start then with the first question, and that was 60, no, it was not 60, it was, we started with 12. Okay, so who wants to start, give an argument about 12? What was the coding and why? Yes, okay. It's obvious 12 is plus 2. Everything was there, but can you give, arguments relating to, so it means we would, on the basis of this item, we would say this person has very high competence in the area of mathematical proving, which are evident from the construction of a formally correct proof, and which additionally has a structure that is comprehensible by the reader. So that is the description we have for this solution. And now we go to the coding rules. So can you describe, relating to the coding rules, why you all said that 12 is plus 2? Yes.
In 12, the teacher, he or she shows his quantities, referring with sketch, with the sketch, and he explained each step the proof by using the explanation, and after that, in the end, he or she give the result with the explanation how did she come to a solution with this. And he explained not only right about mathematical solution, only she explained with the concepts.
And she even had a concluding sentence at the end. That is something which we always ask our students, and sometimes we do forget it, but our own side, yes. So at the end there is a summarizing sentence, and if you look at the coding manual, it's explicitly stated that this intermediate step has to be there, because if somebody simply says, and the reason why this intermediate step was required is many students simply said, it's correct, Pythagoras. It's a little bit simple. This might be a brilliant mathematician, but from this answer, you simply can't say what he or she is thinking. So that was the reason he said, okay, you really would need to write down the intermediate step, and in mathematics we have learned that we have to write down some kind of arguments. Okay. Are there any additional arguments? I guess nobody came to a different solution. Okay, then now let's go to number 8. How can we label number 8 and why? Okay, yes, thank you.
I assess it as a 0 because it doesn't have clear steps such as h squared plus h squared equals or double h squared plus double h squared equals. He doesn't include that, and both he doesn't refer to the Pythagorean theorem. So I think it's unclear and correct but not complete.
Correct but incomplete would be the, okay. Are there others arguments? That is definitely one of the cases where we can discuss quite a long time. Because that is really, it's a tricky one, yes.
We give a point +1
Okay.
because there is no explanation of which theorem he used,
Mhm.
and also there is no explanation each step how he reached. For example, x squared 2,
Mhm.
and we maybe probably he can reach in his mind. I think or we think this is the conclusion. He writes double diagonal, and double diagonal.
Mhm.
So we gave +1.
Okay, because you said, and if we look over here at these two steps, here is the results described over there. That one of computer here. Okay, other arguments.
I think it's 0.
Okay,
Like that.
that's zero.
Because I think it's mathematical correct, but it's not complete because it's nothing about the. It's just double diagonal. It's not give any structure of an
Mhm.
any explanation how he come to the solution. I think because of that, and I didn't give the +1 because I didn't think it's complete as a structure as a proof.
And the incompleteness comes from the fact that Pythagoras was not mentioned.
Yes.
Other arguments. So does everybody argue or agree it's at least +1 or 0? Or do we have other solutions or other codings? No, everybody gave either 0 or 1 or +1. That is actually, we coded it with +1. And I clearly understand whenever we are doing this kind of argumentation, then it is always, you see, of course, indeed Pythagoras is not mentioned. So one important aspect, what you are doing, namely using Pythagoras, is not clearly described over here, but is indeed a serious whole. I agree that. On the other hand, if you read the description, the proof does not show any comprehensible structure in a way where all 3 points of the encoding roots +2 are met. That means these are 1, 2, and 3 above. Results do not have to be demonstrated by a preceded intermediate step. For example, we did not require intermediate step that you have the square root out of x squared plus x squared. You write down a square root of 2 multiplied with x directly. So if we look at that, it is indeed directly describing the solution, but indeed, when I now hear your arguments, it's indeed not, there is a hole in the coding manual. And I realize that now maybe Björn Schwarz has already realized that, and I'll discuss it with him as soon as I'm back. Because what about if somebody doesn't write down Pythagoras theorem? Is that the reason why we say, look, that is then 0? Do we require that? And that is definitely not mentioned over here. So, I mean, I understand your argument, and I mean, it can be because he has done that actually then jointly with Niels Buchholz. So they did this coding jointly, and then, I mean, maybe they had a discussion about that, and then it was obvious, no, we don't require the naming of Pythagoras theorem, or maybe they require that. So, I mean, I get this argument, and I will think it's from this coding manual, you cannot clearly decide whether it's 0 or 1. Okay, so we have now 12 and 8. No, what was the first one?
5.
5. So, okay, next one was 37, was it?
5.
5, okay, 5. Yeah, oh yes, you are right. 5. So, we have this very nice, nearly unreadable proof, or try to write a proof. How did you classify that, number 5? mean, as soon as something is not correct, it's getting harder and harder. Yes.
I would give -2 because I don't think that it is a proof.
Mhm.
If, as a third step, if you talk about some unknown number and attempt to come up with a generalization, and maybe I can think about other points.
Mhm.
But as it is, I think I would give -2.
Okay. Other ideas? Did all the other agree on -2? No, what did you do?
We gave 0
Okay.
because students use only unit square
Mm-hmm.
and try to show the statement using just from one case.
Mm-hmm.
And in the explanation of zero code, it said that this category includes solutions where the unit square and its double are considered. So we think that this solution is good.
So actually, I mean, if you look at the last sentence in the coding manual, likewise, this category includes solutions where the unit square and its double are considered. So, I mean, this refers very clearly to this case. Although, I mean, if it would have been any figure, any numbers, it would have been right. But these were essentially the unit squares, the unit length, and then, of course, the doubling, because, I mean, it's obvious it was, the units are doubled. That is said from the base length. Other classifications around? Did somebody give -1? No? So it was apparently this, it's either totally rubbish or you can see at least some sense in it. Okay. Now we still have left 12 and 37, isn't it? No, 12 we already have.
16 and 37.
37, yes. What about 37?
-1.
-1, okay. Reasons?
There's simple mistakes. In the when he tried found me, there was a mistakes.
So there is apparently a mistake at the conclusion B equals to C, so where does the C come from? Yes, okay. But okay, let's go
Solution
about
complete as mathematically.
Sorry?
Solution is completed as mathematically. It's correct after the end. So because of that, I will just -1. It's not.
I think
Yes, other arguments?
there is no mathematical calculation mistakes, but he doesn't clear. Yes, there is.
End of solution.
And I mean, that is a classical one, yes. And I mean, it's obvious there is no structure in it, so I mean, it's obvious that it couldn't be +1. And I mean, there is actually a small error in it, and of course, there is really no structure in it, so it's very unclear what this person has really done. Okay, and now the last one. Oh, 8, yes.
I think for 97, if it is possible for the question.
What would you say? 97?
97.
Okay.
The
Yes.
misinterpretation of the task, because, okay, he uses x and 2x square in a rule, but he also draws the picture of the situation that he understands, which includes just double in one size, but not double in the other size.
I didn't get that. I mean, he's doubling, over here is doubling this length and that length.
Yes, but he doesn't understand like that. He just doubled one side and keeps the other side same. Then he tries to make a proof. He probably misunderstand the test, misinterpretation of the test.
In
Yes. I didn't. Okay.
yes. Did the paper gave students
Yeah,
in
that was,
visual form? And so
Of course, but he draws his own understanding. It is not important that we give the what shape of items. Of course, he doesn't understand like that. He just tries to explain the doubling the size of it, not the double size of it.
I still don't
Okay,
see.
it might be clearly defined according to us, but he doesn't understand like that. It's clear because he draws the picture there.
There exists an intention. Students
In attention.
maybe understood the question differently.
Yes, I take this. Misunderstanding of the task.
I still don't see I mean, it's not a clear argumentation, but I still don't see why he's only extending one side. Still didn't get that. Because I mean, from my understanding, he's indeed doubling both sides. So where is the
You
error?
mean the same? We are in 16. We have already proved.
Sorry. Oh, yes, okay. And that is the reason why you think it is misinterpretation of the task? Okay, now I got it. But I mean, he had the task, he or she, so it's not a misinterpretation.
But he draws, I think what he understands here.
Yes.
There is a lack in the understanding of the test.
Yes.
He takes the task seriously, but just because he understood, he misunderstood the point, he gives the wrong answer.
But-
Because in the process, he is right in his calculations.
He takes it.
According to his situation.
Yes,
Yes.
according to this situation. And that's the reason why you think it is a misinterpretation of the task. But I mean, you had the task, you had it over there, so I mean, is that a misinterpretation?
Maybe he solved the
Yes, but
picture on the question wrong in a wrong way. So.
Does everybody agree on 97, misinterpretation of the task?
There's an explanation about that also in the.
Yes? Actually, I mean, this kind of case that somebody only doubles one side is not mentioned in -2. I mean, it's not, but on the other hand, I mean, whether that is a misinterpretation of the task or whether that is a serious mistake, I would say, from my point of view, it is simply a serious mistake. Because you only double one side, although you have to double two sides. I mean, you have this question. I mean, there is not a lot of understand. I mean, we don't talk about primary kids. We talk about future primary and future secondary teachers. I mean, I'm really hesitant to say that it's a misunderstanding of the task. I think he or she had no idea what to do. And for me, that is therefore quite clearly a -2. I mean, I understand an argument to say, look, that is a misinterpretation of the task, but I mean, the task is quite obvious, isn't it?
So I want to ask
Yes.
that why, so do we have 97? So what, which response can it be?
I mean, in this material, there is no misinterpretation of a task. That would hold a bit more when you, for example, give argumentations concerning how you would do something in score. For example, you receive student solutions and you should give feedback. And instead of giving feedback, you would tell the students where the error is, instead of giving feedback. So that would be a misinterpretation of the task, because you have not understood that you should not tell where the error is, but you should give feedback in order to solve the problem on your own. So that would be a serious misunderstanding of the task. I mean, you can always say, of course, it is a misunderstanding, but then it will be very difficult to distinguish between a misunderstanding and an error, because then at the end of the day, everything is a misunderstanding. So that is really more meant when the students had to do, or for example, they were asked, how would you continue in your explanation? And this student simply didn't understand that they should give further explanations, but answered something differently. Because that was a whole test about 90 minutes, where you had a lot of different answers. So I personally think that for this question, of course, I mean, it can always happen that somebody interprets the task in a different way. And for example, a misinterpretation could have been if somebody answers, I don't like this kind of argumentation. I mean, if somebody takes this answer, says, look, I don't like visualizations. I mean, that would be a clear misinterpretation of the task. Of course, I mean, you were supposed to write down a proof, and you said something about the visualizations. Then that would be, from my point of view, a misinterpretation. But I mean, what you say, I won't argue that that is not a right interpretation. There is actually, in this case, is not right or wrong interpretations. What you should see is a big variety of answers, and you try to get them with a precise coding manual. And also, I mean, this coding manual is really quite lengthy. Actually, I mean, the whole coding manual was something about 150 pages. You actually, when you have a test instrument, a questionnaire, let's say with 15 questions, yes, and easily up from 150 to 200 pages, which you really have to then describe and with anchor items. And still you come, if you discuss, or if you are coding then with somebody differently, who has not been involved in the development of the coding manual, you need to go through this kind of discussion we just started and code jointly at least 2 or 3 days. Discuss each question and say, look, why did you do it like that? And what is really meant with the coding material? Otherwise, you really will come to very different results. So, and that is actually what I wanted to show you. It is, although it is a very clear method how you can evaluate data. On the other hand, you see the interpretation freedom we had. It's not the case that I can tell you, look, you are wrong. It is not a misinterpretation of the task, or that I can say, look, -2 was wrong. I mean, it's the question how you value something. And you see, I mean, these kinds of tasks are quite often used in qualitative studies. It means you don't use multiple choice items. Multiple choice items are difficult to evaluate, or not to evaluate, easy to evaluate, but difficult to develop, because you need to think what could be possible answers, and are the options close enough together but distinct? Not easy. So the solution is quite often that you say, look, okay, let's go for open items, open response items, and then you end up with this kind of material. And then you have to come up with a controlled way how to evaluate that, and that is not easy. But doing it in such a way as Malring is developing, as proposing it, maybe not in this very extended way, but in a way that you develop a coding material manual out of the material you have used, and then really code your material, and then afterwards, of course, then, I mean, the interesting question is what do you do afterwards, and then you have to really look for the extreme cases, and you have to see when you come to this kind of values, how you can afterwards then come to some kind of structural descriptions of students, in this case, and what they can do. So, I mean, at the end, you would have here, it is a questionnaire where you then would have, when it comes to PCK, you would have a value for each student, and when it comes to MPCK, you have, CK, you would have a special answer, and then you have the belief parts, which is not included into the achievement parts. Then you would say, for example, you can do some kind of analysis, how is the belief part related, for example, to the cognitive part. So you could then try to evaluate this data with relations concerning cognitive and affective aspects. And you would receive for each student, you would receive a unique number, and then you can try to carry out relation analysis. Because that, when you are doing it in such a way, you have ordinal scale value, that means you can at least do some kind of averaging and even some kind of calculations concerning spread. I mean, that is actually really the theory behind that you can then try to come up with descriptions of structures. Okay, do you have any questions? I mean, it is a quite sophisticated way of developing material. On the other hand, it contains many similarities with, for example, grounded theory, or with although in grounded theory, you would not have this kind of assigning numbers to the answers. But I mean, on the other hand, this coding, this cutting off the material in different pieces, and then the assigning of a code to each part is the commonality with grounded theory, and the difference is that you assign a figure, a number to each part, then you can do afterwards some kind of calculations. So these are all quite sophisticated ways how to evaluate texts, which are usually the basis of our studies. Questions, or everything answered more or less sufficiently? Okay, then I propose that we have a break until 3:15, and then I would like to continue with not homework, what you have thought about last night, and then I would like to discuss with you a little bit about research. Okay, until 3:15. work in progress, and you simply submit it because you want to have a chance to get feedback from people around. So people in your research group, in your topic study group will give you feedback to this paper. So I mean, that is the main reason behind that. And then you can afterwards, based on this feedback, you may even be chosen to extend that for the post-congress proceedings. That means because each PhD, I expect, will have a book coming out of that. So, I mean, you may be chosen to extend your study. If you are not chosen, you at least have received feedback and know how to continue, and then you can indeed then extend the paper afterwards, after you have finished or at least continued more strongly in your work. So 4 pages are quite ambitious, I know. Yes.
But for Congress submission, 4 pages is a bit longer, and rather than the other Congress, you have nice 4 pages enough for a Congress submission. For example, in other Congress, we have only 1 page submission.
Or 1 page.
Yeah.
Yes.
In early, you have a word restriction, count restriction.
You think it is not
for
too bad?
It's difficult for the referees.
Yes, but look, what we are going to provide, we expect, to be honest, something about 2,000 papers or posters. I mean, that is quite a lot if you are going to review 2,000 papers or posters. We expect 1,500 at a minimum, and 5 papers and 500 posters. So, I mean, you cannot do that in such an extended way like PME is doing it with 3 reviewers, blind reviews, and receive a very long feedback, and sometimes you are still unsatisfied with that. So what you will receive is some kind of feedback. Yes, you are selected to extend your paper, or you are selected to present your paper in a small group attached to the topic study group. So, and then of course you will receive some kind of short feedback, say, look, for example, I mean, there will be the categories around theoretical framework not extended enough, or the results are too short, or methodology is not adequate. Some kind of this very rough feedback will be provided. And then, I mean, then you have time to try to include that until your presentation at ICNIS 13. Yes, so I mean, it is a hard format.
Yes.
I mean, if you are only submitting 3 pages, I mean, you will still be reviewed. It means maximally 4 pages. But of course, if you only write 1 page, it's hard. Or shall we say, on the basis of 1 page? I would find it more difficult. Okay, did anybody else try to present something or prepare something? I mean, you are going to prepare something for ICNIS 13?
Yes.
Do you want to share it with the whole group? Do you want to share it with the whole group?
No.
No? Okay, I mean, you are a master student, so you are allowed to say no. Yes. Okay. So anybody else who tried to just write something up? No? Okay, I mean, you have the structure, and maybe once more as a kind of summary. Although it's only 4 pages, I still call it only 4 pages for a paper submission. You still should cover all these topics over there. And that means even if it's only 2 or 3 sentences, you should have some kind of introduction where you motivate your research question. Your research question should not come out of the blue. That is not very helpful. So try to motivate your research question. describe the state of the art briefly, but show with this description of the state of the art, you show how far you are already. So that is very important, and you can combine it with a theoretical framework because the state of the art description leads directly to the theoretical framework. You have your methodology, it should be at least half a page. If you don't have, I mean, at least if you have an empirical paper. If you have a theoretical paper, then of course you don't need to describe the methodology, because then you would describe your theoretical approach. But 90% of the papers that usually you receive are empirical papers. So describe at least half a page why you have selected this approach and why it is adequate, and what you have done. For example, like sample size is important. I mean, how many students did you cover? How many teachers? How many future teachers, and so on? I mean, that is important, and what kind of competence level had they been? So, and of course, as said, the results part is the most important part. If you have already results, interpretation and limitations are nice. So at least, especially the interpretation is important. You may skip your limitations part if you are running out of space. So I mean, that is, from my point of view, a very nice and good writing exercise. Because, I mean, writing up something already at the beginning of a thesis or in the middle of a thesis is always very helpful. Okay, are there further questions? Yeah? Okay, then I think I would like to close. Do we have a sound? Because then I would like to close at least with our video, which shows you a little bit about what is going on in Hamburg at IGNI 13. Yes, I think because we have very nice music, and it would be a pity if we would miss the music. Because that is the kind of music we definitely will hear at the opening ceremony. And as said, you can find the video if you want to share it with Oh, yes.
Welcome to IGNI 13. The 13th International Congress on Mathematical Education will take place in 2016 in Germany, in the city of Hamburg, a bustling cosmopolitan port in the north of Germany and its second largest city. IGNI 13 will be hosted by the University of Hamburg, one of the largest universities in the country, founded about 100 years ago. Famous researchers and Nobel Prize winners have worked here, as well as a number of eminent mathematicians, namely Emil Artin, Helmut Hasse, and Lothar Kollitz, who created a dynamic mathematical culture which is still alive today. Like previous conferences, IGNI 13 will comprise a variety of activities, such as plenary lectures, topic study groups, and work groups, for which the University of Hamburg provides perfect working conditions. The Congress will utilize a range of lecture halls, seminar rooms, and foyers for meetings and exhibitions. Furthermore, IGNI 13 will be using facilities in the Congress Center Hamburg, one of the world's most state-of-the-art convention halls, situated right opposite the university. The venue lies in the city centre, within the lively student quarter at Grendel, and is easily accessible by public transport. IGNI 13 will be organised by the German-speaking group on mathematics education, the Society for Didactics of Mathematics. The society comprises mathematics educators from Germany, Austria and Switzerland, and is an internationally active group of 1,000 mathematics educators. From the outset, the German-speaking debate on the didactics of mathematics has had close ties to ICMAI. Felix Klein served as the first president of ICMAI, bringing in many German colleagues and inspiring the international debate. Felix Klein was a mathematician by background who exemplifies specific features of the German debate on mathematics education. He was especially interested in teacher education, and with his lectures published as Elementary Mathematics from an Advanced Standpoint, he set the standards for these kinds of topical activities. As a curriculum developer, he pleaded strongly for a balance.
I have no idea what happens the second time now. So, we can continue. Okay. Maybe I can get it out of the net. You will see how strong the internet is over here.
That should be good.
But it can be that it has to do with, because it's the second time that it happened, but I thought I checked it at home. Everything's done. So, good, once more. Maybe it's simply too big for my. Okay. So I take the small one. So where's somewhere over here?
Felix Klein was a mathematician by background who exemplifies specific features of the German debate on mathematics education. He was especially interested in teacher education, and with his lectures published as Elementary Mathematics from an Advanced Standpoint, he set the standards for these kinds of topical activities. As a curriculum developer, he pleaded strongly for a balance between applications and pure mathematics, a core characteristic of the German tradition in mathematics education. Due to established pedagogical and philosophical traditions, the German debate shares common roots with other European countries. A European tradition called didactic in German or Swedish, didactique in French, didattica in Italian or Spanish. Its core is a theoretical foundation of education with strong normative orientation. ICME 13 will allow Congress participants to gain deeper insight into these continental European traditions of mathematics education. The International Congress on Mathematical Education was organized by the German Community on Mathematics Education as early as 1976 in Karlsruhe, Hans-Georg Steiner and Heinz Kuhmüller being responsible at the time. The keynote lecture by Arnold Kirsch on aspects of simplification in mathematics teaching set the scene for further developments. Now, with ICME returning to Germany, Congress participants will experience the continuation of the debate in research on argumentation and proof, teaching and learning of applications and modeling, promotion of teacher education, cooperation between theory and practice, the promotion of mathematically talented students, and the important part played by visualization and mathematical models. Special features of the program of ICME 13 will give insights into these and other characteristics of the German debate. However, ICME 13 will not only consist of the Congress. It also offers the chance of meeting friends in a fascinating city by the waterfront. The port of Hamburg symbolizes the cosmopolitan flair of this North German metropolis, creating a bridge to Europe, overseas, and East Asia. The city offers an abundance of fresh air, water, and luxuriant greenery. The trees lining the streets and squares, the broad acres of parks, and the green spaces around the Außenalster Lake, together they form the city's green lung. The spacious cityscape is notable for low building density with just a few striking high-rises. Districts with elegant mansions alternate with solid middle-class residential areas and trendy quarters of the inner city. Hamburg, with its 1.8 million inhabitants from 183 nations, is seen as a bastion of culture and a metropolis of learning. The city's vibrant landscape of both high culture and subculture offers a stimulating environment and excellent opportunities for all kinds of creative spirits in the world of culture. Hardly any other city can boast two music halls. And the next one, the architectural landmark Elbphilharmonie, is soon to follow. John Neumeier and his ballet company guarantee world-class ballet performances. About 40 private theatres and 60 museums on arts, history and maritime topics present a multifaceted programme. Hamburg is the musical theatre metropolis #1 on the continent, with Walt Disney's Lion King and Tarzan attracting many visitors. A young and authentic club scene thrives in numerous clubs around the famous Reeperbahn. Life pulsates in the metropolis of the north, by day and by night. In Hamburg, there's always a reason to celebrate. The port birthday, the fair called Dawn, Ulster pleasures. Around the fish market, you'll find numerous rustic harbour pubs serving freshly caught fish. And after a good meal, why not plunge right in? Hamburg's famously creative, flamboyant personalities set the pace in the city's pulsating nightlife, in subculture bars or hip beach clubs. The region surrounding the city of Hamburg extends up the River Elbe around 120 kilometers from the North Sea right into the interior. You can reach the Baltic beaches within an hour. The North Sea, with the famous island of Heligoland, is a short journey away. Further inland, there are other towns well worth a visit, such as the historical city of Lübeck or Schwerin, all awaiting visitors with a wide range of cultural activities. One of many absolute gems is the so-called Alte Land, Northern Europe's largest contiguous orchard. And should you be interested in Germany's capital city, there's an hourly service to Berlin with the high-speed ICE train, which takes just 1.5 hours. Come and make the Congress a prolific experience for mathematics educators from all over the world. See you at ICME 13 in Hamburg.
Okay, that was the last point. I think I can't say more. So I hope I could convince you to try to get money in order to come over. Yeah, so if there is nothing else you want to discuss or question, and I think there is nothing else, then, I don't have more on the program. If you still have points to discuss with me, I'm still here, so we can still have a discussion afterwards. But I hope that you could learn a little bit in these 2 days. It was, quite compact, so having 3 lectures per day is quite a lot, so I hope you found it interesting. You have all the PowerPoints, so you can read many things afterwards, and I have referred to literature, so we can have a can try to follow up this kind of literature I have mentioned. So I hope it was interesting for you, and of course hope to see you next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and for your presentations. I guess it will be very, very helpful for our students, and I mean, it was very tiring for you. It was, I guess. Good. We enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're more than welcome. I can invite you if you accept more.
There's always a chance, always a chance to repeat something, isn't it?
Yes.
So, okay.
Katılan arkadaşlara tekrar teşekkür ediyoruz. Ben kendi kendime konuşuyorum şimdi. Yarın 10-12 arasında tekrar bir başka şey olacak. Onun duyusunu yine gönderirim ben size.